Welcome everybody. My name is Marco Osorio. I'm part of the Youth Advisory Board with the OYCR. It's great to see everybody here. It's going to be very amazing to kind of just get to be part of the La Cultura Cura. So it's going to be very, very, very nice and amazing. I'm going to go ahead and just welcome you guys all. It's really great to see you guys. Um, so today's topic, obviously, La Cultura Cura overview, transformational health and healing. My name is Marco Osorio. I'm a member of OYCR's Youth Advisory Board. We have had a few announcements to share before we introduce our guest speakers for today. Some of those announcements today are going to be today's webinar will be recorded and posted on the OYCR training resource page. And just please be sure to keep your sound muted during today's presentation. One, that way everybody else can hear, and two, that way we don't accidentally think somebody's trying to ask a question or anything, and then we pause in the middle of that moment. We also want to welcome you to share your thoughts and questions in the chat throughout today's presentation. Then yes, I'm going to be 100% honest. Questions will be addressed during designated times. They're really good at keeping the questions, so if you feel hesitant that your question's not being heard or read, it will be read and it will be saved for after either people's presentations or after we're kind of done with the agenda. Then people will be able to answer those questions as best as they can. Today's session does have and it's been certified for 1 hour of STC credit to receive credit for attending. Make sure you guys attend the webinar. MCLE credits are not available for this webinar. I'm going to repeat that again. MCLE credits are not available for this webinar. And then sign up for the OYCR email list to just make sure you guys don't miss any future webinars. Visit our website, and the sign up email list will be entering your contact information in the newsletter section on the homepage. I know somebody will drop the link in the chat, so feel free to do that now if you guys would like to. The purpose of the OYCR Youth Justice Action webinar series is one, to provide all juvenile justice stakeholders with information on practices and trends that highlight the shifting landscape of the juvenile justice field to improve outcomes for children, families, youth, and communities, and even your guys' own communities, right? Because what's the best thing that we could do is making sure we're youth-centered so that we provide the best outcomes for all the youth. And in today's webinar, we will learn about the impact of personnel, for the families, system, and generational trauma system impacted youth more primarily since they've been felt by multiple different systems. And then we'll gain an understanding of the role culturally based on health and healing as they play a big role in the recovery and transformation. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to one of the very, very bright women named Marcia. She's going to go ahead and take over for here.
Thank you, Marco. I really appreciate you introducing the whole webinar series. I want to thank everyone who has joined us. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Marcia Rincon Gallardo. I'm the Chief of Systems Change and Equity here at OYCR. And today I'm super excited. This is a special webinar that we are offering you today. And it's kind of a teaser in a way. More than anything, today is about an experience, a moment in time that pieces of what you'll hear today and experience will remain with you for a while, live in your presence or what some people would call spirit. Our speakers today are masters at this, and I'm thrilled that they're here today with us to introduce and deepen, to anchor this long overdue conversation of bringing healing and spirit to our youth justice field. Our speakers today will be Maestro Jerry Theo, Baba Greg Hodge, and Dr. Angela Irvine. I'm going to introduce first Maestro Jerry Theo, who is a father, grandfather, and nationally recognized expert with over 40 years having delivered to the whole topic of healing and spirit to individuals, families, communities, and systems throughout the whole state of California. Some of you who have joined us today probably already know him. The National Compadres Network has pockets of having done deep, deep work in certain communities throughout the state. He is co-founder of the National Compadres Network and currently serves as Director of Training and Capacity Building. His work focuses on trauma, healing, racial justice, community peace, and culturally based violence prevention intervention. He's worked and trained with thousands of individuals nationwide. Um, then I'm going to also now introduce Baba Gregory Hodge, who we love immensely. He is a social change activist and organizational consultant with Capera Consulting, serving as a strategist, racial equity trainer, and meeting designer. He's a lot more than all that. I don't have all the titles for that, but we know that in community we step up, and I know that he steps up all the time. He has led and supported numerous efforts, including serving as CEO of the Brotherhood of Elders Network and former executive director of the Executives Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. He is a former Oakland School Board president and Fulbright Hays Fellow. Baba Greg is also board chair of the Rockwood Leadership Institute and a proud father of 5. And then last, I'm going to save the best, which is Dr. Angela Irvine, who I've known for years, mostly from Santa Cruz County. She is a nationally recognized community researcher, applied researcher, very important, and youth justice expert with over 20 years of experience with a PhD in sociology from Northwestern. She is the founder of Ceres Policy Research, which focuses on decarcerating youth of color and decriminalizing Black and Brown communities using a liberation framework. For the past 10 years, she has co-led national initiatives to train probation departments throughout the state of California on SOGI data collection and to build alternatives to detention through EBP+. And she'll definitely talk about that, even if it's just a little bit. So I just really want to thank them and all of you who are here right now to listen to this. And so I very proudly pass this over to Maestro Jerry Theo.
Pues, Classico Marley, thank you, Marcia, and want to welcome all of you here today. As we begin, I recognize the privilege of the time that you all will spend with us today. And, just beginning in a good way, by just acknowledging where you're at, the land, and I'm on the Tangwa Gabaleno land. Want to acknowledge the ancestors of that land, acknowledge the communities that you work in, and also acknowledge you and your ancestors and where you come from. And we always begin that way, that good way to bring everyone in. All of you are recognized that work and labor to make the best and bring health and healing to our communities, and I want to begin by thanking you for that. Today we will attempt to share an overview, and this is really just an overview. We will be providing a longer webinar on May 28th, and then open up to you as well if any of you are interested in more specific training, technical assistance, or dialogue on these issues. We are part of OYCR's team to provide training and technical assistance specifically around trauma and healing. And there will be a link in the chat that will that you can fill out a survey if you're interested in more. But I want to begin in a good way, and we're going to go to the slides because we don't have a lot of time today. But if we can put the slides up and just begin. I want to begin in a good way by first of all recognizing that the focus is on beyond incarceration to healing. And La Cultura, Cura, which we'll talk a little bit about today in terms of culture cures, which really means the aspect of our healing and the capacity to heal and transformationally health is within us, is within ourselves, within our own genetic memory, within our cultural DNA, and within the grasp of all us collectively, that collectively we believe that we can heal, help heal our families and heal the children and heal ourselves, but also most specifically the young people that we are responsible for. Next slide, please. Within that, we want to ask permission and give acknowledgement to all those that have come before. There's many people, advocates, and going back to our ancestors that have struggled and have persevered and offered sacrifices. Your grandmothers, great-great-grandmothers, your elders that way have all sacrificed so that we could have a better life, a better community, better families, and each of us individually. So I want to acknowledge those that have come before. There's been many advocates and social justice people that have got us this far, And with that in mind, I want to pass the palabra to Baba Greg, and let's go to the next slide and begin in a good way this day. Baba.
Yeah, Maestro Jerry, thank you so much. And thank everybody who's taking the time to be here today. These are really important conversations, these learning opportunities for all of us, so we can have a better understanding of the work that we're doing. And today, we want to acknowledge I'm on the Ohlone people's land here in Northern California. And the ancestor that we want to bring into the conversation today is James Bell. Brother Bell was the founder and a CEO for a long time of the Hayward Burns Institute. Some of you have probably worked with him as he came into juvenile justice systems to work as a coach, as a mentor, as an advocate, as somebody who was really trying to move those systems, those carceral systems, into systems of youth development and healing. James passed away in Los Angeles after many years of working in our community. He worked all over the country in numerous systems, and had retired in December and then passed away from a sudden heart attack after having a series of health issues. A big energy person, loved life, but we want today just honor the memory of James Bell as we do today's work. And I'll send it back to Maestro Jerry.
It's important for us to always recognize that people have come before to try and better ourselves, better our families, and better our communities. And Brother Bell was one of those. And there's many in the community that have done that. And some of you elders that are here have been working a long time. Want to recognize those and all of you that do this work. And as we begin, the next slide, we want to focus on this concept of la cultura cura. And what it really means is that culture heals. But the explanation of that is we believe that within the collective wisdom of all people, all of us here together collectively, exist the teachings, the values, the traditions, and the medicine for growth, health, and healing of all people. And we begin that way because we believe that the young people that come to us, that if we collectively surround them with love and with respect and with trust and with dignity and the resources that they need, and that information and that guidance would come from them as well, because they carry that already. And so we begin with that premise. We begin that the healing is possible. We begin that with the thought that the transformation is possible if we can collectively come together and bring this knowledge and bring the healing and bring the love and bring the dignity together along with all generations that way. And so we begin with that premise, and that's the premise of the work we do in terms of La Cultura Cura, our health and healing. Next slide. I say once upon a time because it's a story, and we look at the story, but the question becomes, who are the young people we work with, and what is the story of their journey that brought them to us? My mom would say nothing happens coincidentally. That sometimes my family, my dad is Tapilan, Covitecan, and Mexicano out of Texas, right? We have Native and Mexican elders that go way back. My mom was from Chihuahua, but I grew up in Compton. They raised me in Compton, and it was not atypical that on a Friday night you would hear the door. And you'd go to the door, and my uncle and that, and their 6 kids are there, and we got to look happy, like we say, "Oh, okay, come on in," right? We weren't expecting them, And the thing is that sometimes young people show up in our lives in different ways, come from different, different avenues, different journeys, and who are the young people, and what is their story? What brought them to us, and what is our responsibility in bringing them to us, right? But what we tend to forget many, many times, because when we encounter them sometimes, we encounter the young people. And I just want to mention, yesterday I was talking to my brother, and my brother is now, 80 years of age, but he's asking me, saying, "So what are you doing?" And I was mentioning, preparing. He had called me, and I was in the process of preparing for this webinar. So I'm preparing for this presentation. He said, "What is it about?" And I shared with him, and he got quiet. He got quiet. He says, I remember when I was locked up. I remember when you guys used to come visit me on Sundays. All you used to come and visit me, and I got sad because I couldn't go home with you." And my brother's 80, and he started to cry. He remembered. He says, they didn't treat us too good in there. They made us feel like we were animals. They made us feel like that we weren't worth anything. That he says, and it was a hard time. He says, I've never told nobody, but I still have nightmares about being locked up like that. My brother's 80 in a long time. He was like 16, 17 when this happened, and he still has nightmares about that. He still remembers those things, and so as I was preparing for this, talking to my brother, brought this consciousness to me that many of us live, those of us that work in the system and work with young people and bring this lived experience with us. But what is that story? Next slide, Ariel. You know, um, because we recognize within the circle of life, we all come from different experiences, and in our childhood, there are many experiences that we learn from. And it comes in our traditions, we believe there's the duality of the night and the day. You have our blessings, but you also have our struggles. And all of us come with that, regardless of where you come from. Within that La Cultura, Cura, we believe that. So that all of us, those that work and those that are providers and those that are probation officers, those that are teachers, we have those things too, right? And we bring those things too to the work that we do. But we must always recognize that before the trauma, and before all the trials and tribulations, and before the challenges, all of us were children. And these young people that come to us today, they were children too. And there's some basic needs that all of us, and through my 50 years of work and working in communities, from working in barrios and neighborhoods in Compton, Watts, LA, all over, and now all over the country now, I wondered why, why on a typical block that had all kinds of stressors and if you will, markers of stress, of trauma, of poverty, all of that. Why is it that 9 families on the block struggled, but one family made it? How did that grandma raise those kids by herself? How did that single mom raise those 4 boys that were taller than her, but she got them to go to school and they went to church? How did she do that? And part of my work is the research on what are fundamental aspects that are inherent, that are really important for a person to have, or a child to have, in order to not only live and thrive, but in those difficult times, be able to get through that. And through all the research and everything, we come up with some very fundamental aspects that, if you're rooted in these aspects, are really important. But not only that, if you're wounded, if you're struggling, if we can get you back to that place, if we can heal the wounds and take off the layers and reground you in these fundamental aspects, then you can thrive. And not only can you thrive, you can take that trauma and transform it. And we see that in many of the workers today, many of the young people today that have transformed their trauma and now are healers, now are service providers, now are advocates, because they've transformed that trauma, right? And next slide. And the 4 basic teachings are these teachings of being wanted, first of all, of having a connection to someone that sees you as a blessing, that sees you beyond your wounds, beyond your worst things that you've done, that can see through that can really actualize in you that ability to live your dignity. The second teaching is that of having a respect for your sacred purpose, that everyone that is in this world is here to contribute something positive. There's no person that is supposed to be contributing negative. That's not their purpose. It's not who they are. Although in the many thousands of youth that I've dealt with, they've been told that they're a bad seed, a bad person, they're delinquent, they're just, that's all they are. And when that reverberates in you all the time, then you begin to believe that. But what is needed for healing and what is needed for grounding is someone, somehow, to breathe into you and see through that woundedness to your sacred purpose, to be able to respect even your wounds, to respect them in such a way that they can be embraced and then begin to work with. And fundamental to that is that this next aspect of culturally based teachings. I mean, the reason why I'm here today, and many people that I know that have done this work, is because somebody in my family, extended family, whether it's blood family or that extended family, the ones that helps to to embrace this because sometimes our family is wounded, has taught us that we are loved, and has given us some teachings and some ways through our rites of passage, through our journey of life, of how to navigate in spite of the struggles, in spite of this pain, in spite of the trauma. And whenever I talk about this, I always think about my grandma, my little grandma that was about 4'10". I thought she was crazy because she got up every morning at 4:30. And I again was going to school and thinking, well, my grandma doesn't know anything, but every morning she would give at 4:30 and kneel down and pray. Sometimes, you could do an assessment of my family. The more problems we had, the longer she stayed down praying, and then she'd get up every morning and come to the room where all of us kids are sleeping, and she'd give us a blessing. She'd bless us up. And I would complain about that. Sometimes 6 o'clock in the morning, she'd wake me up. Grandma, why you have to wake me? God, I was having a good dream. You messed up my dream. Shoot, you blessed me last night. It's still good for now. Shoot, and then before I walk out, you're going to bless me. Why do I need so many blessings? And I didn't understand. I mean, they didn't say I need blessings to be successful in school. What I didn't understand is that my grandma was inoculating me. She was reverberating in me this message that you're a blessing in spite of. And she blessed all the kids. She blessed the ones that were good in school, the ones that were good in school. The unfortunate thing is some kids don't get blessed this way. Some kids don't get reminded, don't get inoculated this way to prepare them. And so the last part is we need safe, compassionate people and secure places to learn, to heal, and to grow so that we can build trust not only in ourselves, but in the journey that's ahead, right? Next slide. The reality is we live in a society where past and present inequity and injustice produces stress and trauma. And again, we're moving through this real quickly. In the webinar we're going to do on May 28th, we'll get into this a little bit more. But we recognize that stress and trauma impacts our health, our well-being, and our behavior. And there's some realities. There's just some realities that we need to recognize when the youth come to us. When they come to us in that they're already been through a journey, they're already been through a process. Next slide. And we recognize also that we live today with impacts of generations of present day and unresolved woundedness. So my brother that's 80 is a grandfather, right? And some of his wounds, I'm sure, have transferred to his children and grandchildren as well. And we now know that generational trauma, right? The epigenetics, that it gets into our body, into our system. And so not only as a youngster, let's say at 14 or 15, you're dealing with your day-to-day issues. Not only are you dealing with your family's issues, sometimes you're dealing with generational issues as well. And trying to figure that out becomes very, very difficult. Next slide. And what it does is it throws us into a loop of recognizing that we carry much with us. And I want to just highlight this. Some of you are familiar with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, right? And this is a study that was done, right? The rates of trauma of children prosecuted as adults in California, right? And I really want to just, as these young people come to us as teenagers, they've already experienced so much, right? And I want you to look at, that emotional abuse at 84%, physical abuse at 81%. Sexual abuse at 51%, right? Household substance abuse, look at the figure there, 61%. Emotional abuse. The other thing is as we look at, the other aspects, and we could go over this: parental separation, divorce, witnessing domestic violence. Look at those figures, and if we can, for a moment, just recognize that within the spirit, within the body, the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects of these young people that then show up for whatever reasons, for their woundedness now acting out, that their woundedness no longer can be kept in them, but now they begin sharing that out. It becomes coming out of them in ways that maybe they don't even recognize, right? And many times they're put in the care, of systems. Let's go to the next slide. And as difficult as this is to look at, we recognize that even within systems. I'm here in LA County, and as a therapist for many, many years, had to go visit children at McLaren Hall. And those of you that are not within LA County or not familiar with McLaren Hall, it was a place in which we sent young young children that they were taken out of their home because of abuse or neglect or whatever, or they had no place to go and they would be sent to McLaren Hall, right? Supposedly, it's supposed to be a safe place where they could get nurtured and taken care of. And unfortunately, we find that tremendous amount of abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse that has gone on for many, many years, right? In the systems that are supposed to take care of you, not just the child welfare system, but also the juvenile system as well. And so many times children come to us as adolescents doing some very painful things and acting out and doing things, and after being entrusted within the system, now come out with additional wounds, right? Additional wounds. And I come back, let's go to the next slide, to my brother, that after being in the system, right, still harbors those things, you know. And it then often falls into mental health issues. Because when you are treated in a way that is not according to those four values of dignity, love, trust, and respect, you get confused because our spirits know we need that. And after that lingers so long, that confusion of why am I treated that? Why am I not loved? Why am I not being respected? Why am I not being taken care of? Then can make you angry, because we get upset when we're not treated in a good way. And sometimes the inequity of the treatment gets you angry, right? And the anger then, when it's not healed, we send people to anger management. That's wonderful, but it doesn't heal. It turns to hate, and then finally to self-hate, where we begin doing things to ourselves and others, and finally rage, that addictive suicidal behavior. And you can see all the mental health issues that are connected to this. In the next webinar, we're going to talk more about that, right? But let's go to then how we handle this, because how does incarceration and intervention services address these issues? And again, there's many ways of attempting to address sometimes the very harmful things that young people are doing, and sometimes they're acting out, and sometimes they're acting in, but what ends up happening, next slide, is we need to understand that there are different levels of that, and that if we don't deal with the trauma, we can do intervention, you can do treatment, you can do all of that, but if you don't deal with the underlying, if you will, trauma of the spirit, right? It'll be the trauma that's not transformed, be transferred and reinforced by others around you. So if you're surrounded by just people that are struggling with the same trauma, most likely that's going to grow. Next slide. And so we then come to a system, a process of what do we do with that? And when young people are doing harm, and could be whatever they're doing, we want to interrupt the harm, and that's one way, and that's really important. That deals with the physical behavior, right? But unfortunately, we recognize that in the system sometimes people believe that accountability comes through punishment, and if we're talking about healing, the research has shown all over the place that punishment does not bring healing. It actually doesn't stop the behavior. It may stop it while it is in front of you, but it doesn't stop the behavior because the wound is still there. The trauma is still there. And so intervention sometimes is really important, right? And you can do intervention, anger management, gang violence, you can do drug substance, but still intervention is only at the physical and mental level. It doesn't deal with the emotional, spiritual level. And sometimes we recognize that the trauma is so much in the mental health issues that you have to you provide pharmaceuticals, right? And so that will get now to the emotional level. It can really deal with the emotions. And if you're depressed, it can help you with that. If you're anxious, it can help you with that. But it really doesn't deal with the spiritual. And when I mean spiritual, I don't mean religious. What I mean spiritual is the spirit of the person, where they feel whole, where they feel adequate, where they feel respected. And what we're talking about in transformational healing is it deals with all levels. We're talking about the spiritual level, but the physical, emotional, mental, and it can include intervention. It can include medication when necessary, but it does not include punishment. You could have accountability without punishment. And so when we talk about this, we're really talking about a transformation that really makes the person whole and gets them on track again in order that they can feel their sacredness and their sacred purpose. Next slide. We'll deal with this a little bit more because here's a whole coping process that goes on, right? From harm interruption to transformational healing. And on one side is the trauma and the shame and pain. And what happens many, many times is just survival and just coping. But what we want to move is towards healing and wholeness. And in the next webinar, we're going to talk about how do you do this? How do we move from the trauma and the shame and pain, move beyond survival and just coping to healing and wholeness? Next slide. You know, we recognize that our experiences and people's experiences from many different cultures and different backgrounds carry a different story and carries the blessings, but also carries the burdens and the struggles living in this society. And so we want to just highlight some of those things, you know, for the population that I work with a lot, you know, there are many, many different dimensions and come from many different backgrounds, you know. And what is showing up a lot for us right now is the whole aspect of immigration and ICE and the trauma and the anxiety that's coming from immigrant population, and or even if you were born here and have legal status, your parents and your relatives. And so that adds a whole other dimension. But I want to pass the palabra right now to Baba Greg, who's going to guide us through other dimensions to consider in terms of culture and identity, and what we need to consider in terms of dealing with various populations. Baba Greg.
Maestro, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing the story, particularly of your brother, because that, you know, like the trauma, the hurt that we are all feeling in this moment, your brother, all of our families, immigrant communities, and sometimes we forget that, and part of our immigrant community is inclusive of African descendant folks as well. And so as people are going through what, you know, this moment in history, the erasure of, you know, our or the attempted erasure of our histories, this piece is really important. So if you go to the next slide, very quickly, I want to just reinforce some of the things that Maestro Jerry has already talked about. This notion of, next slide, of what is trauma, how do we recognize woundedness, and that the recognition that healing is in fact a journey. The next slide, please. History is really important. And so this notion of family history, when you go to a doctor, generally, if you're seeing that doctor for the first time, you're asked about your family history, like what kind of diseases have come through your family, whether it's diabetes or hypertension or cancer or other forms of heart disease. And so it's interesting that sometimes we come into social justice spaces, we come into the work that we do around healing and not really understand that our history, just like our family history is important in our medical circumstances, our family history, our community history is important in our social circumstances. James Baldwin, who was an amazing writer, novelist, public intellectual, who was very active in the 60s and 70s, says this, that history is not the past, it is in fact the present. And that we carry our history with us, that we are in fact our history. And so Maestro's comment about epigenetics, you know, now that we're seeing the biological and the sciences around how we carry that history in our cells, how our cells are fine-tuned to react in particular ways based on that history, is really going to be important as we go forward in this work. You can go to the next slide. So that this notion of the generational transfer of trauma is significant. It cannot be ignored. Next slide, please. When you think about African descendant people in the period of enslavement for more than 350 years of having people, you know, traumatized, being removed, kidnapped from their homelands, and moved into North America, and South America and Central America and Brazil and other places around in the Caribbean, where folks were pulled away from everything that they knew, had to readjust, had to adapt to a foreign situation after a traumatic passage that we call the Middle Passage, has to be taken into account. Next slide, please. The photograph that image of the slave ship, you can't really do justice to the fact that people were being sold, like families were being split apart, that mothers and fathers and children were being separated on an auction block over and over and over again throughout the course of this history. And yet, here in this moment in American culture, there's a certain notion of erasure, that we can't talk about this history, that we don't want to make people feel bad. Just tell the truth. Tell what happened, and we can embrace that and not sort of drown in it, as Eddie Glaude talked about in his latest book. The next slide, please. And so this idea of people being moved across, go back one. Thank you. Go back a couple. Like, it got advanced quite a bit. Stay there. Yeah, that's it. This photograph is of a ship that was carrying enslaved Africans that was intercepted in the late 1800s. So even though the slave trade ended in the United States in 1865, not until 1889 in Brazil, there was this illegal, immoral transfer of people from one place to another. And what I've noticed about this photograph, and I mentioned it in other presentations, is that these are young people. These are 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds. We don't know the identity of the men who were to the left-hand side of that photograph, who were adults. But we do know that a British naval ship intercepted this ship in the Caribbean as it was making one of those last voyages. And so it's a relatively recent history. It's only 2 generations back or maybe 3, that we think about the enslavement of African descent folks and all of what that meant in terms of trauma. You can go to the next slide. It has continued even in the way that we treated folks in the carceral state. To see this young person brutally tied up to a post. We don't know all the circumstances. Don't know how long that young person was left to languish in that painful way. But that trauma, the trauma that is part of the enslavement of Africans, the trauma that's part of what happened to Native Americans being pushed off of land, being the trail of tears, being moved onto reservations after the so-called Indian Wars and that era of Andrew Jackson and McKinley and others. This was a part of our history that most of us don't really like to think about, but we must begin to embrace this history, to understand it and confront it and deal with what the things that are happening currently. Let's go to the next slide. One of the resources that we wanted to share with you is a great trainer, author, coach named Resmaa Menakem, who wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands. And he really talks about trauma. Go to the next slide. He talks about trauma and begins to help us define trauma more fully. That trauma is the body's protective response to an event or series of events, like in the case of the period of enslavement of Africans, or what happened to Native Americans, or what's currently happening to our Mexican and El Salvadoran and Guatemalan and other immigrant families. That series of events that we perceive as dangerous, trauma is the body's protective response. The response is sometimes rest, fight or annihilate, flee or freeze. And he reframes this for us not as a flaw or a weakness, but as an effective tool for safety and survival. That doesn't mean that trauma is healthy per se, but that trauma can be used in a particular way to deal with your circumstances. Let's go to the next slide. And as we do this work, as we think about the systems that young people who have made bad choices find themselves in, or the systems where young people find themselves of no fault of their own often, it's really important to begin to ask the questions differently. Don't ask what that young person did, but rather ask what happened to you. What is your family history? What is your community history? What are the things that have happened to you, so that we can actually go through that notion of intervention and healing in a particular way. Go to the next slide, please. Next slide. I think that was a repeat. And so this idea that healing is really a journey, that we are all at various levels working to heal ourselves. It really is an African proverb that comes into play, where it says, if you want to go fast, go alone. You can travel up a road pretty quickly if you're by yourself. But if you want to go far, if you want to make your healing journey meaningful, you have to go with others. You have to look for supports, look for coaches, look for therapists, look for culturally rooted healing circles to participate in on a regular basis, to be able to proceed down that road of your healing journey. Go to the next slide. So this last piece, and before I turn this over, is that the more often healing growth takes place, it's on a continuum. It's innumerable points between brokenness and total health. It takes a while to get there. So when Maestro Jerry talked about his brother, I'm sure that his brother has had moments where he's been working on not having those nightmares, not having those bad memories, not having, it takes a while to get through what it is that we have to confront in terms of our trauma. Go to the next slide. And the last thing I want to share is that young people in our community often don't get treated as young people. They don't have a chance to have a childhood. They don't have a chance to play. Don't have a chance to actually enjoy the years of growing up. And the reason I put this slide in here, this is a slide image that I took a few years ago when I was in Senegal, and just the sheer joy of young people playing in the ocean, playing in a park, being able to play with their friends in a safe environment is really the goal of that journey. Is we want to be able to help young people have a healthy, safe, joyful experience in life. And the only way that we get there is this intentionality around recognizing what trauma is, asking young people what happened to them, not what did they do, and then putting the right services, environments, systems around them that don't look like the current systems that we have today. So with that, I want to turn this over to Dr. Irvine to take us home.
I want to welcome everybody and just say that it's such an honor to follow Baba Greg and Maestro Jerry. I'm going to be speaking about what we refer to as intersectionality. Next slide. And putting a little frame around what Maestro and Baba were saying. So I love this image. Many of us maybe have heard about the term intersectionality, but really we all have these beautiful layers of ourselves. We have gender, we all have a gender, we all have a race or ethnicity, we all have an education level, we all have an experience with systems, and all of these, or not, right? But all of these experiences, you can't take your finger away from your body, right? All of these things blend together into the beautiful tapestry of who each of us are as individuals. And similarly, our experience with oppressions is also intersectional. So systems and institutions respond to us because of the way they perceive the way that our identities are related to one another. Next slide. So when we think about gender responsiveness, a lot of times when you hear that term in our field, we automatically assume that gender responsiveness applies to girls or applies to LGBT youth. But I just want to remind everybody that we all have a gender, right? And being a man or being a boy, young masculine people also have genders. And so when you hear all of these lessons that gender responsive research has highlighted that girls and LGBT youth have a trauma to prison pipeline, boys also have a trauma to prison pipeline, especially if you expand the conversation of trauma beyond the ACEs and think about what Baba Greg just talked about, right? Systemic racism, multi-generational trauma, and also things that we talk easily about with girls, but boys have also experienced sexual violence and also have witnessed domestic violence or experienced domestic violence. And so I really just want to use this slide as a way for us to think about how all of the kids in the juvenile justice system are experiencing a trauma to prison pipeline. Next slide, please. Many of us know this, but I just want to highlight that 80% of youth across the United States juvenile justice system, but 90% of youth in the California youth justice system are Black, Latinx, or Native American. And again, as a result of race and ethnic identities, are experiencing multi-generational and structural trauma grounded in white supremacy. Next slide. Research shows that 20% of youth in the justice system identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, gender nonconforming, or transgender. If you look at youth who were assigned female at birth, or as commonly referred to as girls, 40% of girls are LGBTQ GNCT nationally. Within California, we've shown that 50% of girls in the justice system identify as LGBTQ GNCT. Next slide, please. I'm going to dive a little bit into specifically the layer of gender. And so, so on this slide, we see the dark blue are cisgender boys. And by cisgender, I mean young people who are born boys and still identify as boys. So that's 72% of the justice system. And this is pretty strong across states, across the United States. It might vary 1 or 2%, but 72% of youth in our justice systems are cisgender boys. If you swing counterclockwise to cisgender girls, 16% of our justice systems are young people who were born identified as girls and still identify as girls. If you swing a little bit further counterclockwise, 8% of young people in our justice systems are gender nonconforming boys. So this means that these are boys who identify as gender queer, gender fluid, feminine of center, or transgender girls. And then again, one more step counterclockwise, 4% of our systems are gender nonconforming girls. So these are young people who are born girls but identify as masculine or identify as transgender boys. And so if you really look at this donut, gender is really complicated, right? We cannot just think about boys versus girls and think about who was born a boy, who was born a girl, and assume that they're still in those places. We have youth who are feminine of center, and we have youth who are masculine of center. And those identities can switch. And it's these identities combined with race that are driving youth into the justice system. And so that's what I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. Next slide, please. The findings I'm going to talk about are from our 12-year initiative called the Whole Youth Initiative, where we've trained over 25 counties across the county about sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Next slide, please. And what we've found is this very, very consistent finding that girls, cisgender girls, and gender nonconforming boys, so feminine youth, are much more likely to pick up status offenses and nonviolent misdemeanors that are ultimately dropped by the court. So it's just a huge waste of everybody's time, and there are huge collateral consequences, and these charges aren't even sustained in court most of the time. As a sub point, gender nonconforming Black boys, so feminine boys, are 3.3 times more likely to be in this group, which is just an illustration of this intersectionality. So when you talk about gender and race at the same time, the findings become progressively worse. Next slide. If you look at masculine youth, which again are cisgender boys and masculine girls who are Black and Latinx and Native American, are much more likely to receive violent and weapons charges. And if you look specifically at masculine Black girls, are 3.9 times more likely to be in this group, right? So this is a situation where you have masculine Black girls who are being punished for the same reason that Black and Latino boys are being punished within the system. Next slide, please. So my point in all of this is that if you think about what Maestro Jerry, Baba Greg, and I are all saying is that we need culturally rooted programs, and we also need to recognize that all of the layers of young people's identity. We need to see the intersections of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, but particularly race and gender identity. We need to complicate gender binaries, just as we complicate healing binaries. We need to complicate gender binaries. And we need to explore how these intersections of femininity with race and masculinity of race drive youth into the system, but also require different healing journeys potentially. So I think that that's my last slide, and I will pass us back to Maestro Jerry.
Thank you, Baba Greg and Dr. Irvine. As both of you were speaking, it just brought to mind the feelings of young people looking in the mirror and whether they like themselves or not. And it really brings us back to the four fundamental teachings of are you seen? Like my grandma seen me as a blessing. Are you seen that way? Are you embraced that way, or do you have to? I talk about the fake smile. How many times do we do the fake smile when inside we're really hurting? Inside we're really sad. Inside we're really distressed. And then we find, the young people that we're working with depressed or anxious or even suicidal. So the aspect of transformational healing is a process that was mentioned. And let's go to the next slide. And it really affects young people physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And the saying is the body keeps the score. So that if emotionally and spiritually you don't feel good about yourself have experienced tremendous trauma, then it begins to mess with your mind. It begins to mess with your thinking. It begins to mess with whether you can sleep, whether you can eat, whether you can interact. But then it physiologically begins to affect your body, and it begins to then to affect your health and your well-being. It affects all of that. And so when we begin to talk about healing, next slide, we have to come back to us, because the healing begins with us as service providers. We must first begin our own process, and this is one step, a mirror for all of us to look at, because we have our own issues. We have our own wounds, our insecurities, our own biases, and those of us that have come from these backgrounds that we've talked about and now are service providers, we still need to do our own healing. And those that have not need to really recognize that there's a gap there, and how do we really address these biases and then look at what are our intentions. And if we look at that scale from stop the harm to healing, really, what are our intentions? What are the intentions of your organization or your probation office, or you as a community-based organization? Are we really talking about just stopping the harm? Is our focus punishment of youth for what they've done? Is it just giving them treatment so we can check off a box and get funded? Is it just giving them pharmaceuticals so we can numb the pain? Or are we really talking about healing, right? And each one requires something different. So can we then commit to the process of guiding youth towards transformational healing? And if that's the goal, if really that's where we're at, then it's a journey. Next slide. And that journey, really begins with acknowledgement of who our young people are in all that they bring. And not just where they stand there today, but as Baba Greg has really eloquently shared, is their historical sense of what they're carrying. But also who they are in terms of can they accept themselves. And we move then to a process and a journey for all of us of truly understanding the young people and their families and where they are today, where they are with their blessings and their trauma. And what we must recognize in this process is, yes, we talk about generational trauma and pain, but every one of the young people you deal with also has generational blessings, generations of healing, of culture, of traditions, of values, that unless we recognize, there'll be an untapped resource. And what we found, in doing this work for all these years, is that's where the answer lies. In that cultural identity and those values and those traditions and those ways, those are the curative factors. But we must move that to integration, of integrating those wonderful healing aspects, but also decolonize and weeding out and releasing and cleansing the trauma and the toxic things that have moved us, so that we can move to a movement, to a process by which we are now in the journey towards transformational healing that is lifelong. Next slide. And as we, move towards that, we recognize this Mayan saying that says, "En la que tú eres mi otro yo, you are my other me. I see you, you see me, you are me, I am you. We are one. We are a relation." So this presentation is not about, pointing fingers at anyone. We are all in this together. How do we learn from each other? How do we share with each other? How do we help each other to heal and to grow? And how do we begin a conversation that's not based on our own perception of where we're at in the circle, but if we look at the center of the circle, that's where the young people are. That's where they're at, and really allowing them to guide us towards what they need in terms of their health and healing. Last slide. So I want to invite you. We have a podcast that we do called Healing Generations, right? And we want to invite you to sign up for the webinar that we will be doing in May. But also there is a link here for you to sign to answer a survey. We are going to be across the state and providing training and technical assistance, some trainings as well on circle keeping. How do you do healing circles, but also particular curriculum, Joven Noble and Girasol, which are rites of passage programs. So if you're interested in that, please contact us or fill out this survey that way, and I believe we're gonna at this point now pass it back to I think to Michaela, right?
Yes.
Close us out, please. If you would do that for us, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Angela, Baba Greg, and Maestro Jerry for everything that you guys shared. I appreciate all of your guys' insight, your expertise, and the vulnerability that everyone shared during this. I just appreciate you guys for being part of the conversation. I know for my own family and the people that I know that have been impacted by the system, all of them came from broken homes and all of them experienced a lot of trauma. And healing really could have made such a difference if we had just had that conversation, if someone had been there for them. So I appreciate that you guys are bringing up this conversation, especially in this political climate. It's a time for us to focus on healing and come together as a community. Now a few closing announcements as we end the webinar. We want to remind you that the webinar will be available on the OYCR website at the end of this week. We also welcome you to take the survey to provide feedback in your experience on today's webinar, and the link will be available in the chat. And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you again to everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you next month. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.